Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to go over the biggest flops of Whispers of the Old Gods expansion, and I want to mostly talk about the cards relative to what the general population, and myself included, thought about them. And I understand some of you may have thought these cards were absolute garbage and I disagreed, or maybe a lot of the others, maybe everyone else disagreed, but this is just the general case that I've seen. A lot of people thought these cards that I'm about to show you guys would have a lot of potential, but they ended up sucking hard in some cases, absolutely no play whatsoever. So I wanted to show you guys the cards and kind of reason why they didn't see any play, so we can, kind of better our understanding of evaluating any given card, when it comes to pre-releases and all that kind of stuff, and also to released cards, because very often a lot of the very powerful decks that are made are absolutely influenced by the new cards that come out, but also by the old cards that synergize with them. So having a deeper understanding about what works, what is good in Hearthstone is absolutely pivotal to being innovative with new deck creations. So let's kick it off. And the most interesting thing is that there's so few classes with cards on this list. So the first card on my list of 8 here is gall. So, people looked at gall. I was kind of a bit skeptical about this card, but I couldn't really disagree with people that said it was going to be insane. I couldn't disagree with them, because potentially it is insane. If you make gall like a mage card, it is absolutely insane. But the issue with Warlock is the spells that you actually gain a ton of tempo for playing with gall generally just do nothing. Generally just clear the board. And if they clear the board, that means it clears gall with it. So you're really kind of stuck with mid-range spells, which are generally very situational. Warlock is in a spot where you don't really play spells that cost like 3 or 4 mana. You play spells that are very situational in that slot, and very few, and generally in control decks. And, the spells you generally play are 1 or 2 mana cost, so it doesn't actually have much value to put a 7/7 for 7 in your deck to accompany that. And some of the really big spells that are very vital to some of the control Warlocks out there cost like 8 and 9 mana, and again, clear the whole board anyway. So it just doesn't work. It's just too polarizing, and if it was, a mage card, it would be so powerful, and really it could have been, so maybe for the best it wasn't. Next up is another Warlock card, Renounce Darkness. So I was a bit skeptical about this card as well, but yeah, I thought it could be really good. It's a card that's definitely very difficult to evaluate, and in general, on average, should produce a very powerful effect, powerful enough that people might actually make decks around it and succeed. Well, people tried, but they didn't really have much success. It's generally called the Renounce win rate Warlock decks, and that was because a lot of the time you would get such terrible class cards, such terrible draws at the start of playing this card, and sometimes you would just get a terrible class. Like, I think getting Warrior, despite it being like the most flexible class and constructed these days, getting random cards out of Warrior, that's a totally different story. When there's so many combo effects that need to go together, and you only have fragments of this idea, well, it's just not going to work. So a lot of the time you play Renounce Darkness, you draw garbage. Sometimes there's nothing but garbage in your deck, so it costing 1 less mana makes no difference, and you just lose the game because of it. Oh well. From this, we learn cards that are too random, even though they can have really powerful effects. Generally, you have to be a bit careful for, going crazy over them. Now we have a bunch of Shaman cards. We have Hammer of Twilight. Now, I actually thought this card was going to be really good. It is really good in Arena. Well, it's a weapon that produces a minion. It's already a very valuable weapon, so, no doubt it was going to be amazing in Arena. It's actually a lot easier to evaluate Arena cards because you can evaluate them in a vacuum. You don't have to account for all the synergistic and possible effects that Constructed might, kind of work with. But in general, Hammer of Twilight doesn't see too much play because Shaman archetypes that aren't aggro, or I would call them aggro/mid-range Shaman decks, don't really work as well. So, you might play a control shaman, you might find that Hammer of Twilight is better than the other favorite weapons. But then, when you start refining the deck, you're going to get closer to a mid-range. You start refining the deck, and you're going to be basically at the net deck to aggro mid-range shaman. It's very hard to play shaman in any different way. So in this circumstance, we had a card that was very powerful, but was competing with other very powerful cards that were generally in a stronger archetype of the existing class already. So a very powerful card like Hammer of Twilight still didn't quite make it, and that was a bit of a surprise to me. Then we had Evolve. Now, I thought Evolve would be a very powerful card, and it generally is a very powerful card. If you've tried to make Evolve Shamans, not only is it a lot of fun, but you can definitely get some pretty good results out of it. The issue with that is it combines two of the problems we saw in the earlier cards. On one hand, it is a little bit too random on one end, though the average expected result is outstanding. The other side is you need a board, and Shaman's struggle is to get a board whatsoever. If Shaman has a board at all, it's generally in a good spot. So Evolve doesn't really help you get there. It's a win more card in a class that has trouble winning at all, but when it starts winning, it has a lot of win more options. And again, as I mentioned, it does not work very well with the very powerful, very solidified aggro shaman decks. So because of that, it didn't see too much play. And then we have Hallows Eel. So Hallows Eel is the card that Blizzard gave me to reveal out of the set. I was very proud of my card because I thought it was going to be one of the most powerful ones. And to be fair, it is an extremely powerful card. It is a very powerful card in what I would kind of define as a true mid-range deck. A deck that can be either aggressive or controlling, which I think what people regard as mid-range shaman these days is not exactly that. It does not really play as a controlling deck almost ever. But in a true mid-range deck, I think Hallows Eel will be a card that you could sometimes play on curve because sometimes you won't need the heal, but that's not really what we see. The actual true mid-range shaman doesn't exist, and the control varieties also don't really exist. So it doesn't work in the aggro deck because you generally don't need to heal, and usually cards that do damage, you need to use them earlier in the game before you can actually combo it with this card. So it doesn't have the opportunity in aggro decks. Mid-range shamans don't exist. And in control shamans, because heal effects are so scarce, you have to save the card for its optimal effect when comboing with elemental destruction. So you can't really use the card for what it's meant to be used for, because you're so desperate in having that combo, because it's the only way you're going to win a lot of the matchups. So it kind of gets a bit ruined as a result of that, but the effect is still pretty popular in the control shaman world. It's just, that's a very small world right now. And we have Herald Village. Among a few of the other priest cards you'll see, this card did not work out too well. It actually was one of the biggest disasters in my opinion. You guys know I go out there and try to make all the unusual, all the borderline cards work because, well, I just really find that a lot of fun to try to create circumstances where cards that are often not perceived as very powerful do have very powerful effects. And I really tried to make Herald Village work, but it is a card that is just in such a misfit position. I think Herald Village is absolutely worthless in the priest class, but if it was a legendary for any other class in the game, I think it would be borderline broken. And it's such a ridiculous comparison. Like priest just has no way to get the board and keep it more than one turn. And once they have, it's game over. So because Herald Village just doesn't help with that, and Priest's gameplay is so one-dimensional because Priest has no good 1-drops, 2-drops, or 3-drops, it just can't push on the board, that Herald Village actually is not so great. And it's a bit of a shame. But it is a card that if priests do have the possibility to play like a more zoo-like, a more mid-range-like deck in the future, then Herald Village might come back and, if it's not out of standard by that point, make a pretty big impact on the class. But until then, It is not going to see any play. And I have Embrace the Shadow. So Embrace the Shadow, again, is one of these cards that is very difficult to evaluate, but because it is a card that can influence a ton of ridiculous burst damage, I rated the card, and most of the people rated the card as a very powerful one because of its extreme potential. The downside with that is Priest was not made any more consistent, and it already kind of had this effect through Auchenai Soul Priest. And so Auchenai Soul Priest is just better because when you combo with effects like Circle Heal or something, it's a lot better to have even a 3-1 Auchenai Soul Priest just because you have a little bit of a very dangerous board. So a 3-1 Auchenai Soul Priest can do a lot of damage to your opponent. Your opponent still has to prioritize on removing that card, where Embrace the Shadow just does nothing else. You can't play Embrace the Shadow by itself if you draw the cards in a bad order, and ultimately, if you really wanted to play a deck that just kills your opponent on one turn through a combination of various cards, you'd play Warrior, or one of the other 7 classes, but you probably would not really do that as Priest. It just doesn't really work that well. And lastly on my list is another Priest card, kind of making some sense here. Shadow Ward Horror. Holy crap, does this card blow. I mean, we thought the card was going to be pretty good just because it's a board clear, just because it punishes what seems to be, the Zoo archetype that is going to be very prevalent, obviously, during Whispers of the Old Gods. But it turned out, no, it's bad enough that it doesn't clear enough. It costs too much mana for what it does. It's too restrictive of an effect in a class that is already extremely restrictive. And yeah, against classes that aren't Zoo, you're just going to really struggle to find a decent spot for this card. So yeah, I think one of the biggest blunders was probably this card. I think looking back, any card that is this restrictive on Priest is just never going to be that good. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Again, I want to note the cards on the list are all Warlock cards, Shaman cards, or Priest cards. And my general understanding of that is Warlock didn't have more than just the Zoo archetype to work with in the Whispers of the Old Gods expansion. Shamans didn't have anything but the aggro archetype to work with. And Priest just sucks. So Priest will continue to suck, which might indicate that we might get some of the most broken cards we've ever seen for Priest in the upcoming expansion after One Night in Karazhan. But until then, we'll have to see how our predictions check out. I hope you guys have enjoyed my review, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.